Right, Ron, over to you now.
Right. I joined the Labour Party in 1960, and then I was very active in all sorts of campaigns, and I still am now. So, whatever interest you come to Momentum or the Labour Party from, the point is campaigning on single issue campaigns is not enough. What you rapidly realise is, of course, there is the Tory government to defeat, and without that, without defeating the Tory government, nothing will change, nothing will get better. We had a major problem, of course, during the Blairite years, where there wasn't much to choose between the Tories and Labour anyway. But getting back to the basics as an individual, standing as a councillor, I first started off canvassing for other people and knocking up for other people and all the rest of it. And I didn't stand for the council till 1974 for the first time. I'd already been attending Labour group meetings as a Labour group delegate from the Labour Party for years. Anyway, I was asked to go into fight against a rather evil Tory in Hounslow Central, and I was personally very keen on defeating him. And it really was galling that I didn't manage to do it. Now, it just shows you how much things have changed. In '74, Hounslow Central was a safe Tory seat. And no one could ever say that now. So there's been a big change in Hounslow over many years, and how the population's changed and how people's attitudes have changed. Hence, of course, Tony being elected in Osling Grove. That wasn't the first time we got a Labour councillor elected. We had one once before, many years before. Anyway, when I first stood, I was very hot on campaigning and so on, didn't win, and then didn't stand again until 1990, which is rather amusing. A lot of mugshots here. Features me. That's when I actually got elected. And I walked into a situation where there was no one really who knew what to do about anything in the ward. I was invited by the ward secretary to come in and try to organise things. And that was Heston West, which it turned out was the biggest Labour vote in the borough. It still is. Now, I didn't know that when I originally decided to stand. Come election night, we were very fortunate. Our three candidates names were Bartholomew, Bath and Chowdhury. So we just told everyone, vote BBC, which is quite good considering the current fuss. So it was a very simple campaign and very instant recognition, very important when a great many of the population were Asians, fairly newly in England at that time. A lot of them certainly have English as first language, and you couldn't really spend too much time about sophisticated political discussion. But anyway, we won. Then, of course, you face up to the reality, what do you bloody well do in practice, having got elected? I made a triumphant election speech on behalf of us. So the people have spoken. There's no need to ever have any more elections. We all put our fists in the air and everyone cheered and clapped. Thank God there were no cameras present then. Anyway, you then get into the hard slog of it. And first of all, I stood, the council was organised into a committee system. Now, that was my opinion then and remains my opinion today is the best way to organise. Because the merit of it is...
I think you have to explain what it is.
Yes, the merit of it is that although you have chairs and vice chairs, and of course there's people jostle to take those positions, and the leadership tries to impose all that, it means that on any one committee, you've got people that come to that committee because they're interested in the subject. Lots of people are learning on the job. And you actually find that it doesn't matter if people are Labour or Tory, you get discussions. And a very important thing to realise about council business is probably 90% of it is non-partisan anyway. I don't think that's ever changed. And there are still Tories on the council today that were around in 1990. I don't seem to be able to recruit much that's still alive. But anyway, I've found that quite a few of the Tories would be convincible on what you were talking about. So I very much favour committees. It meant that we had committee Labour groups. There would be a lot of people, every councillor was involved in discussion about politics and practicality. So, you know, you would avoid making mistakes before you committed yourself, as far as possible. In fact, largely speaking, we put forward very sensible, coherent policies. And it wasn't just a matter of the whip vote getting things through. What's happened since then, of course, is under the Great Blair decisions, we moved into a different way of organising. Hounslow decided, because there was some choice then, that we would have an executive with a leader, but it wasn't about the leader selecting everybody, as he lied into now. It was elected by the group, and we spent a lot of time arguing and jostling about who should be the leader and so on and so on. But in the end, after I was brought into that system, although I didn't like it, I stood on the executive for most of the time I was on the council. So talking about people's allowances, the basic allowance when I first went on the council was about 2,000 quid.
That's right, yeah.
But by the time I was on the executive and getting extra allowances because of that, I was getting about 15,000 a year in total, which is not bad. However, when you consider that for most people that would be a full-time job, not to another backbench councillor position, which basically Tony's been talking about, I'm talking about where you are supposed to take responsibility for vast areas of the council's business. And I dealt with the environmental brief, and I'd also dealt with the voluntary sector at various times. But the environment thing, while I was in charge of that, we were introducing a lot of these controlled parking schemes, which are incredibly controversial, where you really got to get out and talk to people, because we have, as far as I know, still have a policy that we don't introduce those schemes unless the majority of people in the area actually support it. But it's hell on earth trying to deal with those meetings, because the only time that most people want to get involved with anything is when it's their car parking space, right? And it doesn't matter what the issue is. People get up and protest, make a lot of fuss when they're personally affected. They don't actually want to consider what the overall picture is. So as a councillor, and particularly if you go on the executive, you've got to master the brief and you've got to explain it to everyone. And most of the time you end up having to defend the leadership decision. If you're a good, effective executive member, and now they're called cabinet members, you should lead on your brief and you should be able to change the direction of the council. But that means you've got to be able to speak better and know more than a lot of the councillors who are supposed to advise, council officers, pardon me, who are supposed to advise councillors. And this is where the council's ended up now. Most of the decisions are effectively made by officers. They have their own chief officers meetings. They sort out everything the council's going to do, and then they work out how to pull the councillors into line to follow, led by the nose, right? And that is largely speaking the reality of the situation. But going back to what Tony was talking about, you still have all your constituents to deal with, the area you represent. And it is very satisfying when once in a blue moon you can actually sort out someone's really overwhelming problem. For them it's overwhelming. They've never done it before. They hit a problem. They don't know what to do. You've got to go in to be their representative. At the same time, hold the ring for what the party policy is on the council. It's not an easy ride. Don't get the idea that if you stand as a councillor, you'll heroically lead the charge to bring the revolution in tomorrow. It isn't about that. It's about fighting against the constant reduction in council resources as far as you can, but also looking how can the council work smarter, be more efficient, and there's always scope to do that better. And it certainly amuses me that when I was on the council we heard endless explanations about why we needed yet more senior officers on ever greater salaries. And since I've been off the council, in fact, a great many of those chief officers and deputy chief officers and whatever else they were called have gone. And it doesn't really make that much difference, except to the individuals who lost their fat salary. Now, I don't like the way the council is now, because I really do feel that councillors have almost no influence on it anymore. It amused me listening to the earlier presentation about the boats at Waterman's Park, because I was councillor for Syon Ward, where the moorings are, and I was also, before that, responsible for starting knocking down the gasworks wall, which was in the 70s, between 74 and 76 probably. Anyway, it took 10 months solid out of my life organising volunteers every weekend, demolishing the gasworks wall. And until we did that, there was no Waterman's Park. It was because of what we did that Waterman's Park was developed. So I do know all about that, and the boats weren't there then. So
No, when they came back.
well, They weren't there then. Not when I was knocking the wall down, I can tell you, week after week. So, you know, basically, boats did arrive in the end. I was involved in discussions about boat moorings and did suggest that the council should consider a cooperative mooring scheme. I did cite the fact there is a cooperative boat mooring scheme in Rowshead Road in Isleworth. Anyway, that of course fell on deaf ears as far as the officers are concerned. And funnily enough, a very similar scheme to now I haven't seen this drawing was proposed and argued for very well because it doesn't block the river and collect the rubbish because the tide flows backwards and forwards. The council scheme puts the boats the other way round at virtually right angles to the bank. So there was a great deal of discussion when I looked at this. But anyway, nothing got done because it was not a priority for officers. But we're now getting to the stage where it's very hard to imagine how a new thing like Waterman's Park would ever be developed anymore. Waterman's Arts Centre was built as a so-called planning gain by that little office block that's next to it being developed.
Max Factor.
Oh, yes.
Max Factor, yeah, it was Max Factor. Anyway, the whole of that side was the former gasworks. So, before the Waterman's Arts Centre was developed, I was actually working with local residents groups who wanted a multi-purpose community centre on the site. And that's what you should be doing as a councillor, representing what the local community wants. That didn't happen because the then leader of the council, the then chief executive of the council, had decided in a meeting of two that what Hounslow really needed more than anything else was an arts centre. And that was in the days when councils could manipulate funds, could get in other support from developers and so on, and build new facilities, and then could produce the revenue to run them. Those days are gone. Now we're cutting down on everything. So, you know, don't walk into this, if you're thinking about becoming a councillor, without realising a lot of it is a crown of thorns. But nonetheless, if you're political and you're also practical and you want to achieve something, it's worth giving it a go. But you have to learn your brief. You have to learn what you're campaigning about, know that you're right, and then assiduously stick at it and gather as much support as you can from anybody of any political party, and particularly from the community in the area you're looking at any proposal. And if you're not prepared to do that, don't do it.
Okay, thank you very
Right.
much, Ron. Okay.